there's 800,000 apparently active podcasts, and I think that's just Apple. I'm not even sure that's active podcasts. I think that's.
I'd say it's even less than that, to be honest, Jay. I'd say it's probably closer to 500,000 active, although blog posts, the bloggers, they like to get attention to their posts, so they will fudge the figures. But I mean, look, nobody knows the real answer on this, but this is the thing. There are probably, just to put this in perspective, there are probably 500 blog posts on a subject to every one podcast on a subject.
I mean, and
that puts it in perspective.
And that might be greatly underballing that as well, because everyone's there's so many blogs and there has been so many blogs beforehand. But that's where you can stand out. And I think the thing that I always say to people, why should you do a podcast? Like, go back to that networking event. The last networking event I went to in like late February 2020. When you're allowed to do that kind of thing. I was going back to an industry, so I used to work in IT. I've done this thing for a wee while, and I was going back to an IT event because someone asked me to go. And everyone there was like, "Oh man, love this. Oh, I saw you talk about that." Like I felt intrusive because they were like, "How was the holiday?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I talk about all that at the time. Of course, But the difference is from maybe going to that same networking event when I was in the industry. I would have to go and be like, "Hi, Jay, nice to meet you. So I went on holiday recently," for them to have that information. So instead I was going into this room and people coming up to me and being like, "Love that thing. Like that. Oh, that's really, really cool." Or hate it, right? Absolutely had a couple of those conversations. I keep seeing you everywhere. And I'm like, I know, keep seeing me though, right? And it sparked the conversation. If anything, the ROI, the immediate ROI that businesses are looking for is brand recognition of people. Businesses spend so much money investing in the right salesperson or the right face of this or the right head of that. Well, give them a voice. If you trust them, you're going to give them all this money, especially the salespeople, right? If you're going to let them get on a phone and talk to people, like straight up call a customer and, "Hi, Coca-Cola, yeah, screw you," or whatever. Right? But if you can allow them the rope to be able to do that and to get out and speak to these huge customers, surely it's okay if they say something on a podcast, on a video or something, especially that you can then turn around and be like, "Hey, actually, that's a bit sketchy. Can we edit that and remove it? Can we take that?" You've got the ability to do it. You don't have that on a phone call. Like, you can just look over and be like, "Johnny, no, not Coke, Johnny." Right? That's the only option you really have, right? And I'm starting to see more businesses get it. Right? I'm starting to see more people get it because it's really powerful not having to go around the entire room and be like, "Nice to meet you. I'm Jay and I do this." Even if some people are looking over and being like, "Ugh, that's Jay, he does that." They really know, right? And they don't want to work with me. And I think it's interesting to pick apart something you said earlier. You're very lucky to work with the customers who are right for you. You're lucky, or do you constantly show who you are and people gravitate to that are going to like it? If there's someone out there who's like, "Oh, I hate Neal's cadence," or don't like, whatever, right? Then they're not going to get in touch and be like, "Can I buy that thing?" Whereas if they're like, "Love that stuff, love him, can't wait to talk to him more," they want to jump on the call. And you've kind of got rid of tons of the first bit of the conversation where it's all like, "Hello, yes, podcasting, yeah."
Oh, you listened in on that call I had.
Actually, that was what I had. So did we call each other? But no, that is a thing, isn't it? And I'm starting to see businesses start to understand that the more that you let people get out there.
Yeah.
How many listens does a podcast get? A terrible podcast gets none, and a great podcast gets some, and there's loads of listens in between.
Yeah, and there's a podcast, there's an audience for every podcast as well. It's like so many podcasts get hung up on how many listeners they get, and they'll look at other shows that are obviously you only get the shows that do really well and can prove it, that shout about their audiences. All the other shows that are slightly more modest, they don't tend to shout about it, because then people are going to say, "Well, okay, well, show us your IAB figures then." So, for that reason, you're only going to hear the bigger shows boasting about how many listeners they've got. But that doesn't matter, because if you've got, the way I always put this, Jay, and I don't know if you agree, but if you were to put on an event, right, maybe you were to book out a local hotel,
Right.
Or a restaurant or some sort of village hall, whatever it is, whatever your jam.
Yeah.
And you invited a bunch of people to, Auntie Mabel's hanging around by the sandwiches, but generally speaking, the people that you invite to this event, right, you want them to be there because ultimately you want them to absorb your message and buy from you and understand who you are and buy into you, not just buy from you, but buy into you.
Yeah.
If you had 50 people turning up at that event, would you then stand on stage and go, "Oh, I don't know about this. Actually, there's only 50 people here. I'll see you later. I'm off. I'm gonna stage fade." It's like what? Well, instead of pod fading, you're stage fading. Just doing it in real life.
I love it. And
but
also, would you say
simple?
But would you say on that stage, and like, hey, because I know there's not many of you here. I'm still going to do the presentation, but I know not many of you are listening. And I hear that on so many shows where people, and it's you're right, people get in their own heads. They're watching Coronation Street and they see the numbers for that, 1 million people with an episode or whatever. They hear about Joe Rogan getting, more listens than Saturday Night Live gets on a regular, once a week, and he's releasing 3 or 4 a week. And they're like, oh man, I've only got 100 people who have listened this month. 100 different people listen to your show.
Yeah. But again, it's like, this is how people think. Okay. And this is the mindset that I try and get people out of straight away. Whenever I start working with someone, I sit them down and I say, look, here's the deal, right? Don't look at your stats. Just don't look at your stats. At least until you've given the episodes time to breathe. Because in your head, right, you've released an episode that's gone out maybe let's say last week you released an episode, right? It got 20 downloads, okay? Believe it or not, that's not as conservative a number as you might think. That's probably actually around about the median number, right? You get to say, yeah, sure, I've got podcasters that are getting, 250 downloads within 2 days, and I've got other podcasters that are getting 2 listens after a month, right? And everything in between. And some will panic about the low numbers and some will panic about the high numbers. But the point is, you're looking at it from what we call 0 day. So obviously, people have got to have the time. People are busy. They haven't got time to go straight to your link and download your show straight away.
Exactly.
But a year from now, those 20 listeners, when you go back and look at the stats a year from now, you might find they're actually closer to 200 or 2,000.
Absolutely.
In some extreme cases, they could be 2 million. Will you then go back, if your podcast episode that had 20 the first week you released it and you felt sad, if you went back 6 months later and you saw there was something like 2,400, would you think that was a sad thing? Or would you think, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. I had 2,400 people using these, especially if they're the IAB figures, not the uniques.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's the amazing thing, isn't it? And actually having that connection with people as well. And I love really what you said earlier. Right? I really adore the fact that you've always been into audience participation, right? Or like getting the feedback, because it must have been very difficult on radio. Like I remember listening to Chris Tarrant as a kid when he was in his heyday on Capital. Well, it was heyday because we were listening to radio back then. But and the call-in bits, right? When he Neal, right? Has he won the
Line
thing?
4, speak up.
Has he won it? Like, oh no, he's not picked up. But that was a really interesting bit of the show, because I was like, wow, there's real people on this now as well. But all of a sudden, a few years ago, we're doing the same thing. Like, this is essentially a radio show. No, it's not 5 years ago. I don't need to explain it like that. Gotta get out of the headset. But no, it's essentially the same setup. 2 guys talking to a mic, right? It's going out. It's being broadcast. But we can literally live have someone say, this is it. We don't have to have someone to go to the rigmarole of call in, pick up a phone, wait on a thing, wait for us to be ready and be like, no, we've got calling line 2. We don't have to have that anymore. In fact, we got this constant feedback coming to us from the people out there. And, you can look at your stats and be like, okay, my 20 subscribers, they downloaded the show day 1. A month later, they're the only people who've listened to it. Maybe I don't have that guest back, or maybe that title was wrong, or let's look at it. Let's do more shows like that and see if they fail too, because I'm a big fan of failure being success training. But, you can actually see it come back, and randomly, you can just ask. Put something out and be like, hey, did you just not like that episode last week? Why not? That's okay.
Yeah. Massive fan of that. And funnily enough, that is something that I recommend and I try and encourage podcasters to do, is just ask your audience what they want. And, I've got one podcaster in particular. Hi, Wendy. What we've got her doing now is she actually talks about her stuff that she's doing in her private life on her show, because I've said to her, look, yeah, sure, you're having this guest on and they're giving their value, and they're essentially from the center of the universe of everything around me is about what I do. Yep. There's no awareness outside of that space. If I'm an accountant, I'm only interested in accountancy stuff. If I'm a marketing person, I'm only interested in the marketing stuff. If I'm a pastor, I love God, and that's it. And everything else is irrelevant. But when the host is actually running the show, and almost like the circus ringmaster, it's the host that is the constant here, is the connection between what's going on in those ears and the content that's coming out. So if you've got a podcaster who literally hands everything over to the guest, you're relying on that guest to perform 120% each time. If you come out a little bit and you actually talk about you and you give more of an indication as to why you wanted that guest on the air. This is a big thing I'm all about, is when you're telling your listeners you're about to spend an hour listening to this person talking, about this, here's why I want you to hear that, because I think the benefit you will get from this, and that's, for me, that's the win. As long as you take ownership of that. And you know what? If you get a guest on who sucks, you got two options. Number one, the one no one wants to do, you bin it. And you say, I'm sorry, I've got standards, nice of you to spare the time, but, and then that's where you have your terms and conditions of your show, where you should say, we don't guarantee we don't guarantee publication of the episode once it's recorded. If it's good, then great, it does, but we don't guarantee that.
Sure.
Or you got the other option, which is you go on your podcast the following week and you say, my God, guys, I'm really, really sorry about that. I booked a duffer, and it obviously reflected in the stats, because your listeners, you've got to remember, your listeners are your listeners, right? And if those, imagine your listeners are customers at a restaurant, right? And you're putting out crap food and every single customer is going, this food's rubbish. Are you, as the restaurant owner, not going to then put out some sort of, apology for, we're really sorry.
New cook.
We had a really bad chef. New cook's been hired. Please come back. Give us another try, because we're confident that you'll much prefer the experience. And that's what we tend to be too frightened to do. And I think, nobody here is perfect. I've put out episodes that have been absolute pants. At the time, mentally, I was just, woo! And I put crazy crap out there. You can find it. It's called Too Good for Radio. It's rubbish. But it was just basically me going through a massive being managed out of a radio station moment. And I was like, screw you guys. I'm going to do my own thing now. I'm better than you. Hence why it was called Too Good for Radio. It's rubbish. It's absolute crap. But I'm not deleting it. Why am I not deleting it? Because I did it. It's there, and I'm hanging myself on it. And I'm, and if anything, I think it works as a sort of almost like a shop window for, even he isn't perfect. He might be trying to get us as perfect as we can possibly be, but that's for us.
Yes.
But he accepts and understands that there's no such that, perfection isn't a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah.
And anybody that tells you differently is basically snaky, and they're just trying to get money out of you. So, it's just own it. Just be real, be honest. There's a reason that the videos where people are making mistakes on LinkedIn, one of your followers, actually, Sarah, bless her, I saw a video she did, Sarah Bostock.
Yes.
And she was like, oh my God, I'm sat here and there's a bloke here and I feel really scared. And I thought, that's beautiful. That is just so beautiful. That's brilliant.